To kick off the month of April and fancy meals on the blog, I knew that I wanted to start with how to make mushroom risotto recipe in an Instapot. Now you might be wondering where in the world this came from, but every single time I visit my brother and his wife in Denver, Colorado, we check out some nice restaurants with delicious dishes that are often on the pricier side because let's face it, I'm solo on that trip and I can afford to spend a little bit more money for one meal than if I had the whole family with me and paid for five. So anyways, without fail, my sister-in-law Leslie almost always orders risotto, and I usually steal a bite. If you've never had risotto, here's my feeble attempt to try to explain the taste, the texture, and the flavor. I'm specifically describing mushroom risotto here because this is what we're making today, but it's creamy with an earthy bite from the mushrooms. The Parmesan cheese adds a nice depth of flavor along with the thyme, the garlic, and the onion. And it's finished with a little bit of butter, and that adds silkiness to the ending texture, y'all, and another sprinkling of Parmesan cheese. It's divine. So the first thing that you saw me do was I added my vegetable stock and my chicken stock, I'm doing a mixture here, to a pot or a pan and put that on the stove in order to warm up because I want it to be hot when I add it to my rice. Then I moved on to chopping my onions. You can see here I'm using a small yellow onion. You can add as little or as much as you would like, but I'm dicing that finely. And after I get that diced pretty well with my knife, you can see the technique I'm using. I don't know what it's specifically called. I've seen it done a lot. But basically, I just make some cuts on the top of the onion and then I hold that and slice through the onion again. And then I cut through the top of the onion in a different direction, and this will give you a nice diced onion. Now a lot of people do this and they leave on the end of the onion for a little bit of stability, but I didn't even think about that, so I didn't. I'm adding 2 tablespoons of butter to my Instapot. The setting is on saute, so that's a really high heat, and I'm just going to go ahead and add those onions in, and then I'm going to get ready for my garlic. Now, obviously the recipe I'm showing you is all about the Instapot, but risotto is not really hard to make. It's just a little bit time consuming, but not in the way you think, because it only takes 20 to 30 minutes to make risotto. But you have to pay very close attention during those 20 or 30 minutes, so you kind of have to babysit it. So if you want to not have to babysit your risotto, you can do it in the Instant Pot. It does take a lot longer, but again, you don't have to stand there and babysit it the entire time. Let me explain what I'm doing with the garlic here. So if you take fresh garlic cloves and you want to get the skin off of them, all you have to do is lay it flat on your cutting board and give it a whack with not the blade of your knife, but the side of your knife. Just kind of squish it and the skin literally peels right off the garlic. So that's your little hack, that's your little tip if you're using fresh garlic, which I do recommend for this recipe. A lot of recipes I just use garlic powder, but here I'm using the real deal. So I'm just putting it on my cutting board, laying it flat, giving it a whack. And we used about 4 cloves of garlic, and a few of them were kind of small. So of course I used enough small ones to make one. And then I really like to grate fresh garlic into my dishes because you don't have those big chunks. And then what I couldn't grate, I took my knife and chopped them up finely. And I'm going to add that straight into the pot with the onions and that little bit of butter and give that a good stir. Then I took some sliced portobello mushrooms and I'm going to chop them up even more. Now I did not do this in this video, but I would recommend leaving a couple of these out whole and sauteing them and getting them golden brown and beautiful. And that way you can add them on the top. If you're really interested in a beautiful presentation, I would keep some of them whole and do that later. Now, you don't have to do that. I know that if you're serving this to your family or whatever, you're not interested in it looking incredibly beautiful. It's beautiful no matter what, but if you really want that wow factor, I would keep a couple of mushrooms whole and put them on top. That's just me. So I noticed that the mushrooms needed a little bit more, so I added 2 more tablespoons of butter and I added 2 tablespoons of avocado oil. Now I'm going to measure out the white wine, and I'm laughing there because I could not open that white wine, you guys. The cork is actually stuck in the bottle because I don't have a wine opener. I don't drink wine, so we just had to shove the cork through and it's just floating in it. So I added that. I'm going to let that simmer and reduce by half, and then when that happened, I added my rice, and I stirred that and mixed it really well. And once the rice has absorbed the rest of the white wine, that is when I poured in all of that vegetable and chicken broth that we had on the stove. Well, technically not all of it, 4 cups of it to be exact. And then I'm going to add some thyme, I'm going to add some salt and some pepper and give that a really good stir and get ready to put my lid on it. So let me go back to the idea of the Instant Pot versus the traditional way that you make risotto. So when you're making risotto the traditional way, you literally stand there for at least 20 to 30 minutes and you add ladles of hot chicken or vegetable broth to the rice and you stir. And when that broth is absorbed by the rice, then you add a ladle more and you stir. You're going to repeat that process for 20 minutes. You just can't walk away. In the Instant Pot, slow cooker, crock pot, whatever you have, we're going to basically do the same thing, but we don't have to babysit it as much. So after I put the lid on the first time, I let it cook for 45 minutes on low. That way, the arborio rice can soak up all of that stock very slowly. After 45 minutes, then I took the lid off, I gave it a stir, and then I added 1 cup of the vegetable or the chicken broth that was left. Put the lid on, I let it cook for another little while. All of the details are in the recipe. Then I took the lid off and I added the final cup of chicken broth or vegetable broth. Stirred that in, I put the lid back on, let it cook for 15 more minutes to let that last bit absorb. And then at the very end, once my risotto is nice and creamy, I add my Parmesan cheese and another little bit of butter. Mix that in really well and top with extra parm before you serve and a little bit of parsley for some green color. It's so pretty. And you guys, this is delicious. This is decadent. You have to make it. You have to.